Now, I'd like to take a moment to introduce my colleagues who will be taking over from me. They will be hosting the moderated portion of tonight's discussion and launch. And they're no stranger to many, but I will spare a couple minutes to introduce them. We have Perla Havati. I think I got it right. You can correct me if I got it wrong.
You got it right.
Awesome. And we have Terry McLeod. But before I turn over to them, I'd like to just share a few words. Terry McLeod is an independent Emmy-nominated journalist and recipient of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. He's worked over 33 years with CBC, and 23 of that 33 years was here in Winnipeg. He was the host for the information radio show that was on. And he was a producer for the morning weekend show as well. Weekend morning show. Correct me there, please. Terry has worked in Indigenous radio in various parts of Canada. He's also a participant in the Leadership Winnipeg and served on the faculty of the Winnipeg-based Canadian Muslim Leadership Institute. Terry holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology. So that's Terry McLeod. The voice might be familiar to many if you've listened to CBC over the years. Is no stranger to the community. Perla, on the other hand, is a retired school social worker. She worked for over 34 years as a community liaison officer and intercultural support worker for the Winnipeg School Division. She's a proud member of the Filipino community. If you've ever been to any event, you'll see Perla there. And if you don't know Perla, you're new to Winnipeg. Perla has always embraced her heritage and what it means to involve students and provide systems with the understanding of the students' culture and also their heritage to enhance their learning abilities and environment. Perla served as a president for the Philippine Heritage Council of Manitoba. She's also co-chair of the Intercultural Council of Manitoba and president of the Coalition of Filipino Canadians for Stronger Families and founder and past president of Pinays Manitoba Incorporated. So, folks, you're in good hands. Perla and Terry are no stranger to us. They've been with us over the years with CMCCF for in-person and also virtual events. And they will take us, and they'll be on this journey with us for the next 2 years, I'm hoping, because they're going to be facilitating the storytelling project and future of Jedi Festival in 2 years. So please get comfortable with them. And I hand over at this time to Terry and Perla. Thank you.
Thank you, Kadeen. And Perla, you will be asking the first question this evening.
Yes, I will be asking, but first of all, can I introduce the panelists first?
Oh, of course.
Yes. I'm so glad to introduce to you the 4 panelists we have tonight. And we have Luis Simbandamui, who is co-director of SEED Winnipeg and grassroots community activist. She's a former refugee and she is passionate about human rights and social justice. Sanjam Panag is a first-generation Punjabi settler living in Treaty 1 territory. She graduated from the University of Winnipeg in 2021 with a BA in Conflict Resolution Studies and Political Science. Yuli Vanessa Johnson is the research and data coordinator of the Manitoba Association of Newcomers Serving Organizations. She has a bachelor's degree in social work, and as a former refugee, she places refugees and their lived experiences at the center of her advocacy work. And last but not least, we also have Ismail Ibrahim Mukhar, who has been one of the key leaders of the Manitoban Muslim community for over 3 decades. His extensive and wide-ranging community contributions include serving as president of the Manitoba Islamic Association. So I also have to, Terry and I will be facilitating this portion, and we have two questions for you. I will ask the first question, and Terry will ask the second one. We are given 40 minutes for this portion, so each panelist are given 5 minutes to respond to the question. So my first question, and I'd like to direct this to Luis first. Based on your lived experience and or your observations, thoughts, and reflections, what do the concept of Jedi mean to you, and how do you see changes in Jedi contributing to the health and well-being of families and communities? Hello. You're muted.
I always do that at least once every day. After 2.5 years, I still do it. But anyways, yeah, thank you so much, Perla. I'd like to say that I really like adding that J onto EDI. That emphasis on justice, I think, is much needed. And also, I think it also gives the concept some energy in terms of really thinking that it's something that we're all called to take action on. So what does Jedi mean to me? I think it means creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to live to their fullest potential. I'm a former refugee from Africa, and because of that, I'm really aware of how systemic and structural barriers can really limit the range of choices that are available to families and communities simply due to immigration status, condemning them to a precarious existence where lives and livelihoods are constantly at risk. So now that I'm living in a much safer and secure situation in Canada, both economically and politically, I feel the responsibility to address injustice. Our family was very lucky. The vast majority of refugees, less than 1%, are able to find resettlement in a country like Canada. And I know that community members all over the world, including right here in Winnipeg, face injustice, social isolation, economic exclusion, due to factors such as their gender identity, sexual orientation, race, or class. I have benefited from the efforts of others to address injustice. The protection we received as refugees, not being forcibly returned back to Burundi, where my parents were at risk of being killed, was due to the Refugee Convention. And that convention would not have been enshrined in international law without tireless advocacy efforts. We would not have been sponsored to come to Canada if it hadn't been for the efforts of individuals who advocated for our family, but also for the system that the government put in place that allowed for private sponsorships. In university, I would not have even considered or had the confidence to apply to go to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar if one of my economics professors hadn't pulled me aside and said, hey, this is something that's a possibility for you. So now I feel like I'm in a position of privilege, and I feel like I do have a responsibility to create opportunities for others who are facing barriers through grassroots community work. So a number of years ago, I was part of establishing the Immigration Matters in Canada Coalition when we heard of cuts to refugee healthcare, particularly focused on refugee claimants. I met Tita Perla, I don't know if you remember, Strengthening Families in Canada. So worked with you and youth in the Filipino community on this project. And I love this project because it used a capacity building approach, and the community members that we trained, the assumption wasn't that they were just going to volunteer, they were actually paid, and they helped build and shape the program that we put together. And I loved what we did within the Filipino community. I learned so much from you, Tita. And so there's quite a few other things that I'd be happy to talk about in terms of projects, but I'll just mention a couple more. So one is we recently received funding from the Winnipeg Foundation to provide training to community members, so more of us are able to support refugee claimants to fill out their initial paperwork. And that project is being housed at Healthy Muslim Families, and we just hired a project coordinator. And thank you, Humera, you're amazing, because she's really leading that. And we also recently launched a program to train human rights advocates from different newcomer communities, again, using that same capacity building model that we used in strengthening families, where people get paid both for the time and training and also for the workshops that they deliver in the community. And when we put our application together, we wanted to be very inclusive of youth, of different genders. We asked people what their preferred pronouns were. We wanted to create a really welcoming and inclusive space for everybody. And so I think I'm just about over my time, so I will end it there. Thank you.
So thank you, Louise. Thank you for sharing us all the positive experiences you've gone through. It is so good to hear somebody who's gone through our system here and has had all these positive outcomes. I'm going, because we have limited time, I have to ask our second panelist to please also respond to the same question. Can I ask Sanjam to give her thoughts about this, please?
Sure. So for me, social justice encompasses the three pillars: equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so to advance an agenda of social justice, for me, would be striving to ensure access to needed information, services, resources, to ensure equality of opportunity and meaningful participation in decision-making at all levels. And so in practice, I envision JEDI to redress social issues and injustice so that we have equity of outcome, guaranteed human rights, and overall safety and security of individuals and communities. And so with my work, I'm currently working with CMCCF to launch a Punjabi youth initiative with my peer, who I think is also in the audience. So shout out Prabnoor. But our impetus behind that initiative was that we recognized the Canadian population was becoming increasingly diverse. And so there are needed changes for service providers. And so we need an equitable way and approach of assessing and supporting the needs of our communities, particularly for me, the Punjabi community. And so I really resonate with the D in JEDI in terms of diversity. And so I'd quickly like to touch on that before passing it on to the next panelist. And so changes in diversity have a direct impact on the well-being of families and communities. And I think the pandemic has shown us all that, the importance of delivering culturally competent services, especially when discussing the vaccine rollout. And I think the pandemic has also highlighted the importance of mental health. And studies increasingly demonstrate that South Asian immigrants and communities are experiencing high rates of mental health disorders, which oftentimes go unaddressed. And along with other factors, a lack of cultural responsiveness among providers prevent South Asians from utilizing health services, particularly when it comes to mental health issues. And so mental health can't be understood in isolation of identity and culture. For many cultural communities, seeking help is extremely difficult. And having a provider, for example, that you can identify with makes a significant difference. And so to deliver, for example, culturally competent social services to an increasingly diverse population, we have to have the appropriate workforce. And so when I think of JEDI and diversity in the workplace helps ensure that all backgrounds, beliefs, ethnicities, and perspectives are adequately represented. And that's what we hope to achieve in our Punjabi Youth Initiative, to ensure that JEDI is actualized in all the work that we do, so that we can tackle taboo topics in our South Asian community and access the needed services.
Thank you so much, Sanjam. It's so good to hear from our first generation young person who's sharing her sensitivities about the things that our cultural groups are facing. You've mentioned a lot of really important things that we've gone through, especially during COVID, and your consciousness and your awareness of all these issues and bringing it forward and doing something about it as part of a youth group is really very commendable. So I guess time-wise, we still have to move on. We'll see if we'll have some time later on for more questions. I'd like to proceed to our third panelist, and this time it's going to be Yuli.
Thank you, Perla. I want to start by acknowledging how nervous I feel. I feel that when we feel nervous, it is a good thing. And I think this is the perfect place to be nervous because it really speaks about what JEDA is and how what it really means and how special it is to one and especially to me, which I'm very, very grateful to be here. And I cannot stop stretching how important this space it is to me, mainly because I don't think this opportunity has been ever given to me. So direct that is Jada, because I feel like I'm being included to a group that probably a few years ago, probably no one would have asked me. So being in this position and having my voice to be heard by all of you, it is a great privilege. But before before I express what Jada also means to me, I want to again introduce myself. I want to introduce myself and say who I am. So I want to pronounce. My pronouns is she or her. Identify myself as a Black Colombian woman, and I am the research and data coordinator at Manso, an organization that I'm very, very proud to be part of, and that I very happy to later on talk a bit more about what Manso means to me too. But my background is in social work. I graduated 2 years ago. And yeah, I just want to touch about what justice. And I'm gonna first sort of like say what my definition it is. So for me, justice is about eliminating those barriers that are in the path of those that are vulnerable, as you all know, as well. But I feel that without equality, there is no justice. So justice, equality is about making sure that people are performing at their best, making sure that people have the resources for themselves. But we need diversity. We need people of all background, people of all color. We need people of different social economic. We need that representation. But there is no representation, there is no diversity without inclusion. And that's sort of like my point. I feel that for someone to feel inclusive, there have to be a sense of belonging, a sense of where people can amplify their voices, where their voices are being heard, where they feel safe at a place to speak, where people feel that they are not muted. Why did I wanted to mention this? And my opinion, my perspective, I believe through this panel might be very personal. So the reason why I wanted to first identify this is because, number one, as a former refugee coming to this country, which I am very, very privileged to be here, I do want to acknowledge the number of incidents that I've encountered ever since I arrived here. And I remember, I just want to quickly go back to my childhood. I remember when I was young, I suffered from bullying. And that was back home. So people of my same color bully me. I was young. I feel like a lot of kids go through that. But I remember after I left Colombia, I remember saying that would be the last time that someone would bully me, someone would mistreat me. As I went on, I learned quite a bit about life. I came here, and yet I still feel that I've been bullied, whether it has been indirected, whether it has been pacific, whether it has been by the system. I have been bullied, where people, I find that though people want to understand where you're coming from, still there is the misunderstanding of generalizing everything. So my point is that I want to I want to be mindful of the time, and I know that there has been only 5 minutes, so I am looking at the time. But I do want to share the one experience that I had, which it was when I was in high school, and that's when I came conscious of how excluded and bullied the system, and even people without knowing or not knowing can be. And I remember in high school, I was always the one that would not be picked in a group. So whenever, especially in one class, which was drama class, whenever I was asked to be in a group, I was always that one kid that wouldn't be excluded. I was actually the first Black person. I mean, the only Black person in that class. And for the longest time, I felt very, very excluded, and I did not understand why. Throughout the years of getting hired at different places, it also went on to where I would say something, for some reason I felt that my voice wasn't heard, or either it was yeah, let's continue with the conversation. But I feel like this, I feel like this allows me to recognize the issues that I encounter and understand better those that encounter similar issue, so that I will be mindful not to do it with others. I think I'm gonna leave it like that because there is more questions coming up, and that I'm just
Thank you so much, Julie. I think we're mindful of the time. That's why I will have to move on to Ishmael this time.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be joining this discussion. I think it's a very timely and very critical to have this kind of exchange. One of my favorite authors is a historian or a social historian known as Ibn Khaldun from the 14th century. Now, he makes a very powerful statement where he says there cannot be prosperity without social justice. Now, as Luis, said, I'm also a refugee, and the fact that I'm here in Canada is, testimony to the fact that there is so much lack of social justice globally. If there was social justice from where I come, probably I wouldn't have been here. I know Canada is a wonderful country, it's a safe country, but the main reason for me to be here, probably Louise and everyone else, is lack of social justice, lack of equity, lack of diversity and inclusion. So having this kind of discussion, I think, is very healthy and it's very important. And I myself, have gone through the same process that every refugee goes through, facing discrimination, hurdles and difficulties at every level, from university to find work and so on and so forth. Now, my profession, basically, I am an accountant and I work in the corporate world. I guess many of you work in the social services, but I work in the corporate world. And the reason I'm mentioning this is a very important discussion. And I think we need to take this discussion to the places where important decisions are made, particularly the corporate world. That's where, decisions are made about hiring, about promoting people, about diversity and inclusion. So this kind of discussion, I think, needs to be initiated, but I think we need to go further, bring it to a high level to create greater awareness so that people will not be subject to discrimination. Lack of social justice, equity, and diversity is dehumanizing. It destroys people's self-esteem. There are many people who are talented, many people who are capable, many people who can make, a huge contribution to society. But when there is no justice, when there is no equity, then unfortunately they are pushed to the side, to the margin of society. They are denied, the opportunity to to contribute, to be positive, and people who can make a difference in society. So I think this discussion is very important, and I see people coming from different backgrounds, and I think the more of this kind of discussion we have, I think the better for the whole community and the whole society.
Thank you so much, Ishmael. You brought up a really very important point that we really have to bring it to a bigger forum, this kind of conversation, especially in the corporate world. And I think that's where we're going eventually. We're starting out with our group and moving on to an awareness campaign that involves people who need it at this point in time. So I think I need to pass this on to Terry for the second question, so everyone will have a chance to also speak to the question that we have for you.
Thanks, Perla. And yes, we have all four of our panelists to be included again. And let's go in the same order, since we haven't heard from Louise for a bit, or for Sanjam and Julie. So let's move along. And the question that we want to ask as well, and it's somewhat similar to the first exploration, but how do you describe your lived experience with the concept of Jedi as a way to contribute to the health and well-being of families and communities? Louise, what does that question say to you? You're muted, Louise. There you go.
And I can't be mad at anyone except for myself. Darn it. Okay. So I think that's a really great question. So when I reflect on my lived experience, I very much feel you, Yuli, in terms of what you described. I have felt really isolated at many points in my life, and very much the excluded minority in many different environments. So in coming to Canada, I think similar to you, I was like, okay, this is it. We're finally going to be in a place that we're accepted and we can start rebuilding our lives. But being the only Black family growing up in small town Saskatchewan was challenging. The only girl in my math and science classes, feeling like an alien at Oxford because most of my peers came from very, very wealthy families. And to this day, like when I get asked to be on various boards or advisory committees or whatever, I wonder, are they just ticking off a box, or are they really interested in what I have to say? And so what these experiences have done is really reinforce that commitment to really expand opportunities available to communities that are facing barriers to social and economic inclusion. Like, I think in all aspects of our work, we need to create safe and inclusive spaces. And these spaces need to be places of authentic engagement where we're really open to having members of cultural communities being part of shaping the programs and services or policy initiatives or whatever it is we're doing to address their specific circumstances. One of the key places to start is by ensuring that our organizations are representative of the people we serve. So at SEED, this has been like a 20, 30-year journey. And right now, 40% of our participants are Indigenous, 26% identify as coming from newcomer communities, and the majority are women. And our board and our staff reflect that. So 43% of our board identifies as Indigenous, 14% come from racialized communities, and 21% are past participants. So having that voice of people that have actually been through our programs, being my boss now, is really wonderful. I love that. On our staff, over 40% are Indigenous, a quarter come from racialized communities, and over 20% are past participants. So what that has led to, having those people on staff, having a board that is diverse, means that we've been able to create very inclusive programs at Seed that are tailored to address the specific situation of diverse communities. So examples are working with staff that are former refugees, as well as community partners like IRCOM, to design a match savings program for immigrants to repay their transportation loans, refugees, their transportation or immigration loans. Working with Mount Carmel Clinic to develop a financial literacy program, specifically like using the Strengthening Families in Canada model, where we train 25 community-based facilitators to be able to deliver training in their language and to modify that training so it met the specific needs of their communities. And then because SEED is a more established organization, I think it's very important for us to be able to, when we are able to secure larger federal contracts, use that as a way of supporting and providing funding to other organizations to do their financial empowerment work, organizations like that are immigrant-led, such as Healthy Muslim Families and ACOMI, or securing money from United Way to support organizations like CMWI around their financial empowerment program. So it's also about a redistribution of resources as well. So I will end there.
Louise, thank you so much. And we're going to turn back to Sanjam. And Sanjam, I was doing some research about you today, and I read your paper about the genocide in 1984 at the, what was it, the Blue Temple in
The Golden Temple.
The Golden Temple, yes. And it really gave me a deeper sense of your identity and the things that you care about. But how do you describe your lived experience with the concept of Jedi as a way to contribute to the health and well-being of families and communities?
Sure. I think, as all the other panelists have stated, the realities experienced by individuals who are part of racialized newcomer communities are different from that of other communities. And so it's very important to recognize the unique challenges that they face. And so that is primarily the reason why I became involved with the Punjabi Youth Initiative. My co-chair and I want to use our lived experiences and our community connections and understanding to see if we can build a network of Punjabi youth who can reshape approaches and narratives about stigma-related topics that lead to harm in community, whether it be through dialogue, awareness, and education, and so that we, the youth, could contribute towards the well-being of our community at all generational levels. And so for us, realizing and actualizing those Jedi principles comes with building an intentional community that's focused on healing and responsibility. And so from our experience, it's clear to us that a growing segment of Punjabi youth especially are struggling, which is leading to families and community members struggling. And another point is that a growing part of the Punjabi community in Manitoba is comprised of international students who often bear the brunt of exploitation. And those problems can include labor exploitation, internalized racism, human trafficking, and most recently data has come out growing suicide rates. And last year, Statistics Canada came out with a report stating that international student graduates have relatively worse economic outcomes. And so this is where Jedi really comes into place. How can we ensure that international students and anyone else, regardless of citizenship status, have equitable outcomes, equal opportunity for all the other, to ensure that they can have a stable and secure life, whether it be in Canada or wherever they choose to go. And so these financial limitations, the fear of deportation, unfamiliarity with services, and all these cultural stigmas often stop not only international students, but also folks from all walks of life, all Punjabi youth, to seek help. And so when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I want to note from my own personal experience, it's important to acknowledge that internal hierarchical systems exist within cultural communities. So when we talk about Jedi, it's not just from outside in, it's from inside out as well. And from my experience, I've noticed a new type of racial hierarchy, which is not just based on color or caste, but rather based on citizenship status, based on when you came to Canada, where were you born, all these types of things. And so as newer immigrants struggle against internalized racism, often they face that in their own cultural communities while battling racism from other communities as well. And so, but I believe this issue is not just unique to the Punjabi community, it's prevalent in other communities as well. And so we have to take that into account when we discuss Jedi. The further marginalization of a group within the larger racialized group is not an effective way to cope with the racism the community at large experiences. And I think that's a really important discussion to be had within cultural communities through my personal experience and observation.
Very well taken points. Let's turn to Julie again, to Julie Vanessa Johnson. Julie, I noticed you nodding a great deal as Sanjam was speaking. So what's your lived experience with the concept of Jedi?
Yeah, I want to say I really admire all these panelists. They're so knowledgeable and Sanjam great points. I just want to me, the concept of Jedi, based on my lived experience, I just find that what Luis was mentioning at the beginning, it is important to start with to acknowledge that everyone is so different. You know, all immigrants are all different, even refugees, you know, we're all different. But I find that when we come to Canada, there is sort of like this conception of like, you know, if you're a refugee, then you lived for example, in a campsite, when unfortunately it's not for fortunately it's not for everyone, and unfortunately for those that, you know, go through that experience. But and then also there is the concept of like, if you're Black, then you're from Africa, or if you are certain color, then you behave this way. If you dressing in this way, then you are this. So I find that that's sort of like so there is a lot of stigma, and that's one of the reasons why I find that Jada is extremely important. And in terms of like representation, I find that it is important for companies, employers to understand that yes, though there is there has been a lot of work and a lot of progress being done, I personally feel that there is still more and more work to be done. And when hiring when hiring people from different background, different lived experience, it is important to respect and value them as they are, with the concept that they bring and making them included, because just because you feel that you are including someone, it doesn't mean that that person feels included, which is completely two different things, right? So it is important to understand that it's not just about checking the box. Oh, we have someone who's Black, we have someone who's in. It is about actually putting that into action. So I personally, I call for more action, you know, more listening, but doing it. And absolutely, as Sanjay was mentioning, including more the youth, because I feel that youth are the leaders. They have so much to say, so much to give to this community. They know what they want best, but it is just the matter of they being listened. So yeah, I think that I would just leave it.
Julie, thank you so much. Let's turn back to Ishmael Mukhtar. And Ishmael, I'm curious about your lived experience in the concept of Jedi, especially as a man and as a Muslim. How do these things get reflected in your lived experience?
Okay, thank you, Thierry. I guess I can speak first from my personal experience, which I touched upon a little bit as a refugee, as somebody who comes from a conflict zone. But I can also speak as a former president of the Manitoba Islamic Association, which represents, a community, a very diverse community, members of a community where people come from more than 50 countries, Somalia, Afghanistan, Kurdistan, many, many regions across the world. And I guess they all come to Canada with the hope of, finding what we are talking about, social justice, inclusivity, diversity, and so on and so forth. But what is really traumatizing for many members of our community is this hate, that's directed towards the Muslim community, which, we refer to it as Islamophobia. And I guess you're all aware, the two attacks that happened in the last few years. First, the Quebec mosque attack, and then the other one, the London family that was basically, killed for no other reason except for being Muslims. And that really raised the question on, how inclusive we are, how willing we are to accept other people. I know from my experience being in leadership position, many of our women who, choose to wear in a certain way, they face discrimination, they face harassment, and they face, all kinds of challenges when they go outside. And there are some even who want to dress, the way their conscience directs them to do, but they can't because of the hate and the stereotypical, reactions they confront outside. So from that perspective, I would say, yeah, social justice, inclusivity, diversity for our community is really something that community is hungry for. And I think having this kind of exchange, this kind of discussion, I hope will open more minds and will lead to something more concrete. And I think, if we want to have the kind of society we want, probably we need to change perceptions. We need to change people's way of looking at other people. And I think one area which we probably need to focus is social media. That's where people are getting their ideas. That's where, all this hateful message is circulating. As much as we can talk here, as much as we can do in the field, which is important. But I think that social media is shaping people's perceptions, people's ideas, people's attitudes. And that's where really a lot of effort need to be done. And I hope this discussion will be a beginning for something towards that end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismail Mukhtar, and thank you to all four of our panelists. We're now, Perla, going to turn to a couple of people who've been listening very intently to give us their reflections on what they've heard. Would you like to introduce them for us, Perla? Let's turn your mic on, Perla.
There it goes. Now, for our reflectors tonight, we have Alka Kumar. She is an educator with a passion for ongoing learning. She views herself as pro-academic, given she has equal interest in research and practice. And through her work, her objective is to bridge these two worlds that are often quite separate from each other. We also have Labna Hussain's shared passion for community service and mental health prompted her to create a podcast, Desi Me Healing, where she discusses cultural stigmas, mental wellness, healing, and spirituality. So at this point in time, I guess I'm turning this over to Alka and Labna.
Thank you, Perla. And thank you, Terry and Perla, for your expert facilitation here. And we and to the panelists, all the wonderful panelists who could share their experiences, their thoughts, their points of view. We're very grateful. And I agree with Ismail when he said we need to continue these conversations and take them to different spaces as well, where decision making perhaps happens, and make sure that we get, our voices are heard. And that is really the plan going forward over the next 2 years of this project. We do want to keep expanding the reach of these conversations, so we can actually move towards some kind of change. Perla kindly introduced me already. And yes, I do have a passion for working in the in-between spaces. I guess that's coming from my identity making. I kind of have these many layers, multiple layers, as we all do. Being an immigrant and into this country. I used to live in Winnipeg. I live now in Toronto. But since Winnipeg was my first home and I lived there for 10 years, it's very, very close to my heart. And I feel very grateful to be part of the work that's happening with CMCCF and contribute to it. So I just want to say a couple of things, and I'll pass it on to Lubna. And we have I think we have one question on the chat. So I want to encourage everybody who'd like to ask a question, make a comment, share your observation, because we have a lot of resource in this room, not just in the panelists, but in all of you, because we all of you bring wonderful lived experience. I think I agree. So just one quick thing. I've been at Metropolis this morning and was, where a lot of conversation has been happening on EDI, DEI, framing it in different ways. And so the variation of adding justice, so far, I think we've kind of got the copyright on it for now. Of course, I'm sure somebody else propagated it, started it, but I did not hear Jedi during Metropolis, I must say. I was very happy to know that. The other interesting thing for me is that we are turning the lens inward, because generally we find EDI being talked a lot about in organizational contexts. So to bring it to the community context, I think is again something really important, because these are the home spaces where we live. And those are sometimes the most challenging ones that we want to change, but we feel like trapped in our cultures, in our values, in our families, in our communities, and we find it hard to changes. And again, this I'm saying from my own lived experience. So I'm really very encouraged to see Sanjam and other, like young community leaders who are keen to take the cudgels up in their communities, because I think that's where the lived experience is so valuable. We understand our communities much better than outsiders do. So I think that's what we need to leverage, those personal experiences, those understandings of culture, because one thing that's sometimes lacking that leads to racism, discrimination, and lack of well-being is the fact the cultural safety is not there. In relationships when we are dealing with stakeholders outside the community or even within the community, oftentimes there are very, like relationships, intra-community relationships, or even within the community, there are a lot of, like fractious kind of relationships. So, and my background is also conflict resolution and peace building. So I kind of want to look ahead and imagine a culture of peace and look at peace in a broad kind of way and see how can we make it real? How do we envision a culture of peace and well-being and then slowly keep on working towards it? So that's all I'll say for now. I'll pass it on to Lubna. and to kind of introduce and just sort of say a few words, and then we'll go to chat. Meantime, I'm hoping that we have some more voices coming in the chat, and we'll take some of the questions from the participants that the panelists can then also respond to. Over to you, Lubna.
Thank you, Alka, and thank you everybody for having me tonight. It's a privilege and honor to be amongst everyone here and just listen. And I just have a little bit to share, and I picked up some overall themes amongst all the brilliant panelists, and I see Jedi as a journey amongst all the panelists and what they shared. I hear acknowledgement and responsibility from Louise, and I hear safety and having the need to belong through what Yuli shared, to having a dialogue, what Sanjam mentioned, like amongst her internal community, through bringing that awareness, and awareness also through the corporate world that Brother Smile shared. And I hear like an overall, there's responsibilities amongst our own communities that we are proactively doing to address Jedi, and it's they all are interconnected, and it's just what I observed about like each panelist and what they said. You know, whether it's justice for Louise, that's something, you know, she focused on, and the responsibility, you know, for her community, like I said earlier. So I just want to focus on the theme that came up for me, and how it was more like a journey that played out through this discussion. So that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lubna. So if I may just share a couple of questions from the chat box here. Rashid says, can you share your thoughts about what do you see the major barrier in Canada? And I guess, Rashid, you're referring perhaps to the biggest barrier perhaps to Jedi. You know, what are the gaps? Where do we see the obstacles to implementing Jedi? It's all very well to think about it and want to get to it and implement it, but what might be the barriers? So maybe the panelists might want to respond to that, but I also want to just bring a couple of other questions that are already here, so we have them, so we can just trying to make room for more questions, because I'm just greedy. Okay, so another question here is Hudan, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly, but you say, thank you for sharing. How can we put all these words and experiences into action? Exactly. So that all our communities can be included. Yes, I'm sure the panelists are going to say that's such a big question. Sonia says, thank you. And then an open question to anyone. What do we mean when we use the word community? Yeah, back to kind of basics, because I think sometimes it's really important also to like define some of these words, because often we use the same words, but we're talking about different things. And Cruz says, I would like to thank you all. Great evening, learning advocacy. Looking forward to work together, for sure. So would any of the panelists like to respond to any questions we already have in the chat? Yeah, Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll respond to the question about community. And I also love Hodan's question because it's very action oriented. Yeah. So in terms of community, I think it is a fluid concept, and it means different things at different times because we belong to multiple communities. So it could be communities based on sexual orientation. It could be cultural communities. It could be communities based on age. It could be a particular location in the city. And so it is fluid. I think it is helpful to do more than we do in terms of defining what community we are referring to. But I think often it's also used as a bit of a shorthand to refer to ordinary people that don't have the levers of power, like in terms of political power or corporate power. And I think often when I use the word community, that's who I'm referring to. I love Hodan's question because I liked how inclusive it was in terms of all, because I think, and I'll also touch on the question about what are some of the major barriers. I think a major barrier is being really insular in terms of focusing on a very narrow set of issues that we're concerned about, or a very particular community, and not seeing the connections and the intersectionality between different issues, and recognizing that there are multiple communities that we're connected to. And even if we don't belong to a particular community, that often the root cause of the issues that we're facing are very similar, and that we need to figure out ways to work with each other. And I would say one of the biggest things that I feel like I have a responsibility to work on as someone that's living in Canada on what I consider to be stolen land that is steeped in injustice, and where we see the ongoing impacts of colonization every single day when we walk out on the street, is that we need to work in solidarity with Indigenous peoples. We need to amplify their voices in terms of the injustices that they're experiencing and continue to experience. We need to also step back and learn from Indigenous community members as well. So I'm really pleased, and a number of the organizations that are represented here are part of an anti-racism letter writing group that was launched by the Immigration Matters in Canada Coalition. So we meet monthly. We make sure that at every single meeting that we're writing to policymakers about an Indigenous issue that has been brought forward by either Indigenous community members or Indigenous-led organizations. So at our last meeting, we wrote urging the government to take action on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2 LGBTQ plus community members by fully implementing the calls to justice. We also write on refugee issues. At a recent one, we also wrote on the infiltration of white supremacists within the Canadian military and the need for the Canadian military to take action around that. Getting to Islamophobia, we've written on Quebec's Bill 21 around really victimizing and preventing people from wearing any religious symbols. So I would invite all of you to be part of our letter writing. And if your organization hasn't already joined, I think we have about 12 or 15 organizations that are part of it. So you're more than welcome. We meet once a month, and the people that are part of it help shape what it is that we write on.
Thank you. Thanks, Louise. And I think by all these responses, we kind of that from panelists, it's kind of lighting the way forward when we think about, how do we implement? What do we actually do? What are those action steps? And perhaps, some kind of in our own lives, some whatever activism or advocacy that we can do, being as part of our own work, could be one important action step. Any of the other panelists would like to respond to the questions? Yeah, Ismail and then Julie.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Well, I like to look at, community. There are different ways of defining a community, but I would also like to look at a community as, a group of people who have common concerns. So I guess we are all here because we have concerns for justice, equity, inclusiveness, diversity. So we constitute a community, and I think as a community that is marginalized, or at the community that's at the receiving end, at the community that is trying to bring positive change in society, I think from that perspective, we need to, communicate more, share resources, and discuss these issues in broader terms. Because part of the challenge I see is every community, every marginalized community, they are working on their own, trying to address, the challenges they are facing. So the more these communities open, and I'm not talking community from ethnic point of view, I'm talking about for community, people who are, not well represented, people who are facing discrimination, people who are marginalized. So rather than every group working on their own, when these communities come together, share their expertise, share their knowledge, share their experience, I think that will go a long way in addressing this unfortunate situation that we see many of our communities struggling with.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna sort of like answer very general, but it's more so like things that could be done, and that there is so many things that we need to continue doing, but also implementing. And I think it is our role. It is the role of everyone to make this happen, so that Jada it is more into our present, that is more applied. And I think one of the roles that need to be taken is from home. I think parents need to teach their children the value of respect, the value of understanding other culture, but also even if you disagree, but the value of of being just being practice equality. And I say this because I find that one of the communities that are very very left behind, it is the 2S LGBTQ community. And I find that there is, when it comes to culture, there is a lot of rejection towards this community. There is a lot of misinformation as well, and there is a lot of things that we think that just because someone is from the 2S LGBTQI plus community, we think that everyone is such a way, or that everyone behaves in such a way. So I find that there is a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misinterpretation, and why not starting from home as well as being more inclusive with people with disability. Regardless, there is so many people with different disability, and I find that there is a lot of stigma and I apologize for my word, but ignorance, I am gonna say. And I think that needs more. And just like I go from home, then I'm gonna go from school. More training in school. Kids at a young age, they need to be trained in all of these what it means, what is justice? Justice. Yes, it is a big word, but kids are so smart. What is equality? What it means to include their peers. And what a great example. Actually, I was listening to a podcast, and it was saying that it is a great example when you show a picture to a child and you tell the child to describe what are they seeing, and you will be surprised on the answer that you will get from children, because children have such a big imagination and they're so creative. So I find that educating children, youth, it is a good way for action. Now I am gonna go to organizations, and there is so many ways that organizations could do to incorporate that inclusivity. My English is not the greatest, but I try my best to express myself. So, for example, along with other organizations, there is the anti-racism framework that they have been working on for a while, and there is a lot of call to action. And one of those call to action is integrating more people with lived experience, people from different backgrounds into the workplace, but not just the workplace, but the board member. But and then even to that, obviously there is still more work to do, where people, it doesn't just get hired or doesn't get just called to be part of these great organizations, but also that they feel included. And I often stress that, because one thing is, and sometimes you feel kind of used when you know that you're being hired, but yet you're not yet fully included. I am very privileged, as mentioned at the beginning, that I work for Mansocas. I feel that this is the first time in my 30 years, 31 by the way, 31 on my age now, where I feel that my voice matters, where I bring an initiative, and my initiative is being heard, and that is what we need. We need we need more people to feel inclusive, but also we need representation. We need people that community people that have this lived experience of even and have that knowledge and trauma informed to work with clients, because those are the people that can connect with clients, especially newcomer, come with so many experiences, mainly trauma, and it is one of the hardest thing to open and to share their story with people that they feel that they're not gonna be understood, but I find that they connect so well with those that are sensitive, with people that have the lived experience and just listen, and I often want to be careful when I say the word listen, because when we say listen, we often think that, oh yeah, just stay quiet and listen. But it's not about just listening, it's about acknowledging what is the one is saying and also putting it into action. And I find that in this work, not just in the settlement sector, but in all the work, in not just national, worldwide, we need more action. I do want to point out something, which is my work with my work, which something that I've noticed in the settlement sector. This goes for all of you settlement sectors. And the acronym, it's nice that we use acronym. It is wonderful because when we're speaking, it makes it faster. But when we use acronyms so much, those that are new in this in the work, we feel so we feel that that we feel so behind. So we have to learn about the word. We have to learn about like the settlement. We have to learn about all of this, but then we have to learn about all the acronym. And there is always new acronym, which is great. Because at the end of the day, we're gonna learn. But it is one of the hardest things, especially for someone that English isn't the first language, and that is quite new to all of this. So yeah, I feel that I talked a lot, but I just wanted to highlight those things. I want to say more, but I will be quiet right now so that everyone has the opportunity to speak.
Julie. Sanjam, did you want to add your thoughts to some of the responses?
Sure. So to begin by saying that the definition of community that I was using while speaking was, I define community as a group of people who share an identity-forming narrative. And so when I was speaking, that identity-forming narrative was a cultural one. So I'd like to put that out there. And I'm going to attempt to answer all the questions in this one spiel. And so I think an inclusive community is one that values all its members and, of course, helps them meet their needs. And I think awareness and education are extremely important in overcoming barriers when it comes to the implementation of JEDI. Awareness and education can work effectively to achieve the reduction of hate and racism and discrimination, all while implementing JEDIs, because laws alone do not change a culture and result in change. People have to initiate that change, and that transformation comes through education, conversation, through intervention at all levels, and that transformation comes along with lifelong learning. And to answer Martin's question in the chat, I think, was that Martin's question? Something regarding education and also bias. Education plays a huge role, whether it's in the school systems or whether it begins at home. And there is a need to take action. And when there is a clear understanding that there is a need to take action, often the best way is to determine what action to take. And so, as an example, many newcomers don't know about Canada's colonial history prior to immigration. And when folks do take the citizenship test, there's about maybe a few pages on Indigenous peoples in Canada, which completely glosses over Canada's colonial history. And so I've heard from a lot of newcomers that are not aware about what reconciliation means, what their role is in the journey towards reconciliation as settlers in Canada. And so the lack of exposure to such important information makes newcomers and communities susceptible to adopting negative narratives that can be spread, which leads to harmful stereotypes. But more and more, I'm noticing through connecting with youth that children of immigrants are attempting to fill in that knowledge gap from what they're learning in school, online, or through their peers. And so that shows me that achieving the reduction of racism and hate and the implementation of JEDI comes with education and connection so that we can combat this othering of others and other communities. And so for me, the implementation of JEDI requires inclusion, which is fostering a sense of belonging by centering, valuing, and amplifying voices of marginalized groups. That all stems from education. So I hope that briefly touched on all the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sanjam. I'll just bring a couple of other questions that are in the chat, and then maybe I can turn back to Terry and Perla if they want to ask any follow-up questions of the panelists. So Martin says here, I'd like to know about how we in our families and communities create the ideas that bias us in favor or against other people. Another question that he also put in the chat, which I think by accident he just sent to me, like what is the peace and conflict? How does it exist in our communities, whether it's inter-community, intra-community, all the different, isms that and how do we actually end up, what do we do by way of ending up reducing the biases that impact members of communities in a negative way? There's another question from Zareen here. I'm wondering if anyone feels whether or not the education system plays a role in training minds of accepting or not accepting others. And why do we even marginalize people within our own communities? These are all really, really big questions. And I think so far the discussion has kind of centered through responses of panelists on, what action can we take? What does solidarity look like? What can ally building look like? And how do we not just keep reinventing the wheel, everybody working in their own silos, but how do we collaborate? It's so easy to kind of, keep talking about this word collaboration, but the challenges in collaboration, the power hierarchies sometimes that are implicit there, I think those also create a bit of a problem. Lubna, did you want to say anything? And then I'll pass it back to Terry and Perla for...
I didn't have anything. I was just going to read the next question, but you got it. So thank you.
Okay. So Terry, would you like to...
Well, I have just a couple of observations as someone descended from a family who came to North America almost 250 years ago from Scotland. And I grew up in a very, very homogeneous, isolated place in Canada, in Prince Edward Island. And I notice as I look at the screen here that there's so much diversity and so many different perspectives that I wonder what advice you have to reaching the larger pre-existing community in Canada. Families like the people that I grew up with in Prince Edward Island or elsewhere, where you say, where there were no immigrants in Prince Edward Island when I was a child. And so we need to develop a more diverse and welcoming country. But early on, I was very fortunate to get involved in Leadership Winnipeg, where I met Martin Itzko, and then I got engaged in the Canadian Muslim Leadership Institute and met tremendous people and learned a huge amount about this community and the changes that I needed to make. But how do we reach people who consider themselves to be pretty content with their isolated identity in Canada?
Such a wonderful and big question. Anybody who'd like to take that? Sanjam?
I will attempt to tackle that big question. I think, Terry, first of all, it's a great question, but I think that just shows how important representation is. There are communities that will not have, for example, say many immigrants in their communities or many refugees, but when you see representation at different scales, whether it's in leadership roles, whether it's in political roles, whether it's through media, films, TV, movies that sort of share that cultural knowledge, I think that is one way that cultural competency could be distributed to isolated communities, in my perspective. And I personally did not know about, for example, Canada's colonial history until I entered university. I was not taught in high school. And so I was very isolated. I went to a private Catholic high school and none of that was taught, but I learned through media. And I think that was very beneficial for me as I attempted to sort of understand my journey as a settler, and took various classes after that. But my first initial point of contact of sort of cultural education competency in the area of what it means to be a treaty person was through books and media. And I'll pass it off.
Thank you.
I can respond if there's no one else. Yeah, I think there's many different levels to a lot of the questions that people have asked. I would say one of the things that I think I neglected to mention is we also just need to start with ourselves. So there's mention of internalized racism. So there is self-work to be done there, but we also all carry, because we're products of this culture, this society, the institutions that have shaped us. So we know that we're also carrying biases. And so being always willing to critically look at that, being open to being challenged, and being willing to shift our perspective and really listening carefully, I think is really important in acknowledging our privilege. I really like your question, Terry, and I've grappled with it because when we hold educational sessions in the broader community, often people that already agree with us are there. And so it's kind of like, well, how do we reach the people that, as you said, are really uncomfortable, are really comfortable in their situation and not particularly open to that sort of critical self-interrogation and wanting to take action in solidarity. So I would say that one of the ways, which I think would be open to a lot of us, because we are probably all connected to different organizations that have been supported by United Way, is United Way is always desperate for people to be part of their speakers bureau. And so if you were supported by the International Center or your kids went to the Winnipeg Boys and Girls Club, like pretty well every organization in Winnipeg has some connection to United Way. You could sign up for the speakers bureau. And I've used that as an opportunity to talk about the really good work that United Way does and how important it is, but then to push the envelope a little bit in terms of doing a little bit of education and making people feel a little bit uncomfortable, like talking about the importance of working with people that have exited the justice system, talking about immigration loans and the impact that that has on people, talking about the injustice and the fact that we don't live in a meritocracy. But again, it does take a toll on me to do that, and I can only do probably maybe one speaking engagement every couple of weeks. So I'm going to turn the question back to you, Terry. And I know that you've done a lot of work, both in your position when you're in CBC, but also some of the other work that you've done. I think some of the most effective messaging comes from peers. So in the same way as when we're working on domestic violence prevention, having men talk to other men is really important. Having privileged white people talk to other privileged white people is probably super effective.
Yes.
So I would say you and your peers who are already sensitized, and so when there's that whole issue of refugee claimants coming across the border, and there was this like really ugly narrative that was forming about people like queue jumping and people feeling unsafe. So a bunch of us put together a toolkit to help people have those conversations. But the big thing that we wanted to do was go to those small communities that were directly impacted, find the people there that were already allies, and give them the education and the tools so that they could be the ones to talk to other people in their community. So it isn't us, but it's them. And so I'd say the major responsibility lies with people that already have quite a bit of privilege and have the ear and the relationships with people that are in that position.
Remember, I wanted to watch the final game of the Raptors a few years ago when they were winning the NBA, and I didn't have a big television, and so I thought I'll go to the Grand Mosque. And my friend Idris El Bakri said, "Why don't you come down and watch the game here?" And so I went down. There was free popcorn. It was wonderful. We were all in a fantastic mood. We were celebrating our own little community of people who loved the Raptors and wanted to see them do really well. And I've since become, I like to think of myself as a friend with Idris El Bakri, a wonderful, brilliant, caring individual who is included in my world now as I see it. And so I really appreciate that. And when I met Ishmael at that mosque, and I've met so many wonderful people there. I studied Islam for 3 months with Idris and a whole class of other people because I wanted to understand the faith better and hear why people cared so much about it and how it affected their world. So the ways in to enlarge your community, I've been very fortunate.
Well, I guess, Terry, if I may say something, I guess first, I'd like to commend you for your efforts to reach out and to understand other communities. You came to our community, you tried to mingle with people, even though your background was, purely, exclusive kind of environment. So I really commend you, and I hope everyone will do the same thing, reach out, understand. Now, having said that, I think bringing change in a society requires, the effort of everyone. So I think first the community should open up just to share our experience. For example, our community organizes open houses. And these open houses basically is an invitation for everyone to come and meet and chat and exchange and come and see, firsthand that, we are all humans. We all have the same concerns. We all share many values. So these kinds of open houses definitely create a better understanding and also, a better appreciation of each other's cultures and values. But also at the same time, I think opinion leaders play an important role. Politicians, educators, and decision makers. And somehow this segment of the society needs to brought into the board so that they can, be leaders of change. Just to give you an example, unfortunately, and I'm not getting into politics, but, our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, one time he was interviewed in CBC, and when he was asked what's the biggest threat facing Canada, he simply said, Islamism. And which, for many people, that sends a very frightening and negative message. So it's not about a certain community. I think in Canada, we want a country that's inclusive of every culture, of every ethnicity, of every faith, where people, as Martin Luther said, would not be judged by the skin of their color, or I may say by who they are, but by the content of their color. And to create that kind of society, I think this will be a collaborative effort. It's not only the white people who have biases, but also so we as communities also have certain biases, and the only way we can overcome these biases is by communication, reaching out, and showing leadership, and also understanding. It's fine to be different. We don't share the same views on everything, but the key element is to be respectful of other people, and at the same time also acknowledge the other people's right to be different. And I think that can go a long way in creating the kind of society that we all aspire.
Yeah, if I may jump in for a second, I think one of the really important things that's happened with the conversation around DEI or EDI or, being so centered is the fact that the questions of internalized racism are being raised very much in the mainstream. And that's good because it doesn't target any one community or any one kind of, one color or anybody. It's like all of us being encouraged to reflect on who we are and what are our values. And in that context, I just want to come back to the one of the pillars within CMCCF being, the focus on all voices matter. That it is bound to be that people will think we are all unique. So why would we not all think differently? But how do we build bridges across those differences? And how do we then become more aware of the biases that we ourselves have instead of thinking of who else has that bias? So I think, as Louise said, the work really begins with oneself here. And then goes forward. Perla, did you want to put something forward for the panelists? How much time do we have, Martin? Do we have 10, 15 minutes more?
We still have time.
We are actually almost over.
Okay, so
I was about to say that actually there's a lot of initiatives in our community that is trying to connect people with each other. And it's just important for us to just keep on doing it. It's a very slow process, but we're hoping that we can multiply that effort as we move on. I like what Sanjam has pointed out a while ago, that the role of our kids filling up a gap, for instance, because through going through our educational system, they're able to help their parents be more conscious of things that are happening around us, like connecting that, making sure they understood what's going on with our indigenous community and all that. Because mostly our immigrant parents are confined in their own culture. And it's our kids who bring this information to their families. And so they play an important role. When I used to work as community liaison officer, that's what I was telling, the message that I'm telling parents is to listen to their kids because they can learn from them. From the information that the children learn from school. Now, probably it's our role also to make sure that we kind of monitor what is going on in schools. The kind of curriculum that they are having is to make sure that we're moving forward in terms of equity and inclusion. I know there are, it's very slow moving. There's a policy now, an equity policy that has to be implemented, and we have to monitor that. I also want to point out that there are, efforts like the Intercultural Council, where there's a whole group of cultural groups that are trying to connect with each other, learn from each other, because there's so much going on around us. And it's just a matter of making sure that whatever small things we're doing, we keep on moving on forward.
Thank you, Perla. Yeah, it has been such a privilege to be in this company. And I'm going to pass it over to Steve just to sort of wrap this up. But I can't help but share one small thing that I'm stealing from somebody who was a panelist in during the pandemic, the difference between how they define diversity and inclusion. I'm sure you've heard this before, so I apologize. So diversity means being invited to the party, and inclusion means being, asked to dance. So I the way that was position. So I just want to kind of close on that and passing it on to Steve for the final closing. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Alka. I'm Steve Felger. I'm a member of the project team. And just before we wrap up, I just want to mention to everyone, in the next couple of days, we're hoping to send you out by email a brief feedback questionnaire that we would very much appreciate you filling out for us to give us feedback on this evening, the things that you felt went well, things that you learned, things that we could do better in the future. It shouldn't take you more than 5 or 10 minutes to complete it. If by chance you've joined us this evening and have not previously provided us with your email address, if you could just put it in the chat now, that would be much appreciated. And we certainly will provide you with the results of what we hear from all of you in the survey. And encourage all of you to check our website in the future for upcoming events. I also just want to take this opportunity to thank, first of all, our panelists for your thoughts and wisdom and for your willingness to participate when we invited you to join us this evening. To our moderators, Perla, Terry, for making this evening go so smoothly. Our reflectors as well for your thoughts and comments, having heard from our panelists and others. We also have a very dedicated event planning group who worked very hard over the last few weeks to make this happen, this being our official launch of our project. But most importantly, I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening. At a personal level, I can say the richness of the conversation, your ideas, your wisdom, has certainly provoked me to think of things in many different ways. It's enlightened me in terms of some of my own ideas and thoughts about Jedi and where we need to go. And the one thing that I kept hearing from many of you was the comments and ideas around the importance of moving forward and the need for change. And what struck me was that in addition to the ideas that everyone had with regard to system change, leaderships who need to take more initiative, it reminded me that each of us in our own small way is an agent of change. And I know it's gotten me thinking this evening, and I hope each of you can go away this evening thinking of at least one more thing that you can do as a result of the conversation and the things that you've heard this evening and learned this evening, to continue to be an agent of change in your own small way. And we need to celebrate those small changes and the contributions that each of us make, because in the end, those large changes that we're all looking for can also be accomplished by what each of us contributes to making that change happen. As we mentioned right at the outset this evening when Kadeen was opening up this session for us, this is the official launch of our project. I will invite you to continue to participate with us over the next 2 years. We have much to accomplish. We have much that we're hoping to accomplish. We want your participation. We also want your input and ideas as we move forward. Kadeen mentioned a number of different activities and events that will occur over time. And we certainly want you to not only participate, but to share with us your ideas and how we can accomplish what our goals are. I also want to just thank again Canadian Heritage and the Government of Canada providing us with the funding for this project. That is very important to us as well. And before we just say goodbye, I noticed, Julie, that you have your hand up. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to share.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I feel like I didn't have a closing. So I do want to have that opportunity if that's okay. And sort of like what Terry was sort of asking, and I want to echo what everyone said, but I think that, obviously there is a lot of people that are comfortable or feel distance with their community or not seeking out for services, because a lot of time they have a lot of bad experiences perhaps, or they're just shy. There's many reasons. But I do want to add in something that I haven't heard is the importance of organization meeting deadlines and being accountable, because I think that's one of the main reasons why clients often just don't want to participate, because at some point they just felt like they were failed, and also instead of asking how can we reach them, we could just start doing it. Like, why don't we just ask? I've never had the opportunity to be in such a panel, and I probably wouldn't have if Steve didn't come and didn't send me the email to say, "Hey, Julie, would you like to be part of this?" So, like, just the matter of fact of asking, and I feel very privileged once again to be here. And I do want to read this quote that everyone knows or have heard it, from Martin Luther King. And it's one of my favorite quotes, which is, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of the skin, by the content of their character." To me, that is very impactful, because my dream one day is to be treated equally. I don't want you to treat me like a pedestal. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I could sit here and tell you so many stories of things I've encountered and how I've been excluded and things I've gone through, but maybe one day I will. But at the meantime, right now, my hope is that later on, my children don't feel what I feel. Later on, my hope is that young children don't feel what I've gone through. And my hope is that, just like I had this opportunity to be at this panel, those that thought that they could not do it, or those that thought that they were so behind, because there are many people with so many experiences, very high knowledge on status and studying and such a long journey. I want those people not that, hey, yes, there is a lot of knowledgeable people out there, but your voice matters, just like Alka say, your voice really, really matters. I understand that my voice matters. And though a lot of time in conversations, I feel very uncomfortable with certain topics, I have to recognize that I am happy that I feel that way, because that's what makes me learn more. Being a spokesperson makes me to be more knowledgeable and also more aware of my own biases and my own races towards other groups. Even if I don't want to be racist, I have to recognize and be an anti-racist by recognizing the mistake I've made on other groups that are not, in quotation, part of my group. I think I'll just leave it like that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. And I think that was a wonderful way for us to wrap up and finish this evening. Those were wonderful words. I very much appreciate your willingness to share that. So with that, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. I wish you all well. We look forward to having you join us again at our next event, and continue to do the amazing work that you're all doing. And please keep in touch, and we look forward to you joining us again. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.